Hello, my name is Chris Beauchamp and I'm a mobile engineer with Key Cloud. This is the second part in a three-part video series about tips, tricks, and tools for App Store success. As a quick recap, in the first part of our video series, we discussed some general best practices for not only curating your idea and creating your application, but also how to compete with all the other applications out in the App Store. We also introduced a few tools that you can utilize that will help you build and iterate your application. In today's part of the video series, we're going to dive into a tool called In-App Analytics, which is a way for you to better understand not only your application, but how your users are interacting with your app based on the data that they're providing and the data that your application is creating. Finally, in the third part of our video series, we'll show some code examples and actually get into an open source demo that essentially shows how you can utilize these in-app analytics to change your application on the fly. In the first part of the video series, we left off discussing the current state of the mobile analytics market. So as it stands now, the current solutions look something like this. You've got Flurry, who is probably the largest provider in the space. Google Analytics is making a nice transition from web to mobile, and you also have other competitors popping up like Localytics. These providers do a very good job showing you things like usage, user retention, operating system breakdown, and all of the core analytics that you really like to see when you deploy your app. But one of the questions that we're asking at Key is, are these enough? So we found that when you try to take your application to the next level and turn it from just an application into a business, you need to know more information. You need to know more about your users and what your users are doing in your app to make informed decisions on where your application should go. Now, if you take a look at how mobile analytics are generally implemented today, it might look a little something like this. You have your application, and your application and its users are creating all of this data. And you're storing this application in some kind of backend, in some kind of cloud, whether it's your own database infrastructure or an MBaaS provider such as Key Cloud or Parse. Your application's data is all going somewhere. Now let's say that you want to add analytics into this application. What you need to do is add the Analytics SDK and choose specific attributes and events of things that you wish to track and start sending this through their SDK into their backend. So what's wrong with this approach? Well, what is sent for analysis is really just a small slice of the overall data. So if you take a look at the diagram, you can tell that most of your application and its data is being stored in the application backend. And only the events, only the attributes that you've picked out are being sent to the analytics provider. Secondly, data is generally displayed in the vendor's terms. And what I mean by this is it's not customized to your application. If you open Flurry Analytics for App A, App B, App C, it's all going to be using the same exact metrics across all of these applications. So when you really want to dig into what's happening with your app, you need it to be customized to your app. Finally, whenever you think of a new metric, oftentimes you need to redeploy the application. So when you initially set up your app, you're choosing which events and which attributes to send to the analytics provider. But what happens when down the road you realize that you need to start tracking something else? Well, you need to go back into your application code, you need to start adding that to the SDK, you need to bundle the application and redeploy it to all of your users. And by the time that it's rolled out to enough users to start getting any meaningful information, weeks, if not months, could have passed. And this turnaround time is just far too long for you to make good business decisions for your application. Now, very quickly, I'd like to talk about what I mean when I say metrics. So let's say you have a to-do list application, and the to-do application is storing all these different to-do items that your users need to do. They're storing it up in the cloud. And let's say the object looks something like this. It's got an item title, an input method, and a Boolean flag on whether or not the task has been completed. So in this example, let's say as an app developer, I would like to see the average number of incomplete to-do items per user where the input method is voice. So the metrics are all the things that I need to track in order to execute this query and figure out this information. One more quick example is, let's say I am a game developer and I'm tracking all of the game scores per level in my app. I also have user profile information that's associated with these game scores. So what I'd like to know in this case is how many women have scored more than 150 points on level 7. And again, the metrics are the things that you need to be tracking in order to answer this question. Now that we understand the downfalls of the current space, what do we propose? Well, at KeyCloud we're working on something called in-app analytics. And what this allows you to do is analyze the entire data set, all of the data that your app is generating, all of the event data, all of the analytics data. Utilize all of it, not just the slices of data that you're sending to the analytics provider. Now, how is this done? Well, if you're using a service like KeyCloud, you're utilizing KeyCloud's backend to store all of your data anyway. So store your analytics data in parallel to this. It's all in the same place, it can all be utilized, it can all be cross-referenced at any time. So you're taking a look at all of the data that your app is generating, not just these slices of data. Another great feature is that there's usually no need to keep changing your app. Since your app is generating all of the right things, it's all accessible to you at any time. You don't need to go back in and update which attributes you're sending to Flurry or which events you're tracking. Everything is already stored, everything is already there for you to take advantage of. Another great thing is that you can define metrics that are relevant to you. So when you open up the console, you're not seeing the cookie cutter metrics that Flurry or Google Analytics might provide, but you're seeing application data in your own terms, based on what your data schema looks like. And this is very valuable for you to actually figure out what your application is doing in your application's terms. So I say you can do this on the fly. Well, what exactly does that mean? At KeyCloud, we actually have a developer portal that's available for you to configure countless scenarios to make use of your analytics. So real quick, I want to go through our console to show you just how quick and easy it is to get started with doing this. So here we're in our developer console, and we're in a sample application here. And we're in the analytics section, particularly the configuration section. So what we're going to do here is add a new aggregation rule based on what we discussed before, our to-do item application. So we go here and we add a new aggregation rule. And since the data is being stored in our application, it's actual data that's being created by the users, we're going to go ahead and leave app data selected. We're also going to update the name and call it something worthwhile. Now what we need to do is select a conversion rule. So what a conversion rule here is in this case is different object types that are being stored by our application. So think of these like a database table or a bucket of objects that you're storing, and they're all the same type. So here we have a number of different types: task, feature, message, and age, and this is populated based on your application's database and your application's schema. So we're going to use the task type in this case, so we'll go ahead and select that. Now, since we're trying to create a metric based on the input method, we wanted to know how many of our users are utilizing the voice input method. We're going to go ahead and leave this aggregation as is. We just want to count the number of people who are using the input method. And this is how we want to slice up our task data objects. And again, the input method, this is going to be dynamic based on your application's schema. So if you have other keys, those keys will also show up here. Finally, we just want to go ahead and say, yeah, we want to use the input method as our dimension. And we'll go ahead and save it. Now, when it's time to see the results, we just go over to the metrics section. and our to-do tasks entered data type over here. And you can see we've got some chart here, some graph, and a table with all of our data in it. So since we used the input method as our dimension, we can go ahead and select this here, and it will actually slice up the data based on the different input method types. So here in this case we have email as an input method, voice, and keyboard. And we can actually go ahead and see the breakdown that's based on time. We've got the days of the month down here. Or we can see the cumulative totals also down here at the bottom. So you can see how many people are using keyboard, voice, and email. And this can be very helpful to you as an app developer to help steer your application. If you know that keyboard is being used less, you can downplay that in your user experience. So these kind of analytics are very, very important, but notice that they're all customized to your exact application, and it couldn't be easier to set up. One more quick example on how these analytics can look once you've set up the proper aggregation rules is here in this section called Purchases Made. So what we're doing here is actually breaking down the users and the status of the user. So we have a concept of free user and pro user, and we break this down by both gender and where the user is located, so their region. And we can slice up all these different dimensions to get interesting statistics about our application. So what we'll do here is slice by the region. We want to know where users are using our app. And you can see it populates the list with a number of different regions here in the Bay Area. And what we also want to know is where are our pro users? Where are our power users? So we're going to select one of the filters here and select our user type. And we want to know where our premium users are hanging out. So we'll go ahead and select that, and the data will be repopulated. And we have all these charts available to visually break down the data. So here, this one's very helpful here. We can see that Berkeley has the highest percentage of pro users, followed by Santa Clara and Fremont. Okay, enough with these charts. I'm an app developer. I want to know what I can actually do with this data. Well, this is where I'm going to cut you off today, and we'll actually get into that in the third and final part of this video series when we get into some code and an open source sample project to show how you can actually utilize these analytics within your application to change it on the fly. That's going to wrap it up for today. So in the meantime, go check out our new ebook called 5-Star Apps, 10 Keys to Success. And this is a great mobile app developer's guide for creating, building, and iterating on your application and competing out in the App Store. So definitely check that out and stay tuned. We'll see you next time.